Capel Celyn. The flooding of the valley and the powerlessness of the people of Wales to present its lead to an upsurge in the it led to an upsurge in the popularity of the Plaid at that time. So the struggle to save Llywelyn was lost. But let me tell you about a battle won. The establishment of a Welsh language television channel. After much campaigning, hand in hand with Cymdeithas yr Iaith, the Welsh Language Society, the Plaid gained a major concession in 1977. Radio Cymru, Radio Wales, which had previously been a pirate radio, was legalised under the BBC. The campaign moved on to television, and an agreement was reached in the UK government to establish a Welsh television channel. However, in 1979, the British government backed away from its promises. This threw Plaid's leadership into turmoil. The government's position hardened. Various strategies were proposed, all seeming ineffectual, like withholding TV license payments. Then, on May the 3rd, 1980, Gwynfor Evans shared his secret with the world. Imagine the scene. An executive committee meeting of Plaid was drawing to a close at Naoedd Pantycelyn, Aberystwyth. Several members of the executive had already left, and the rest were anxious to leave for home. The chair then asked if there was any other business. Gwynfor raised his hand and said that he did have one other matter to discuss. In measured tones, he stated that he would starve himself to death unless a separate Welsh language channel was born. He stated firmly that the fast would begin on October the 5th. This, of course, caused fear and consternation to everyone who heard. There were meetings galore between the Welsh Members of Parliament, the Home Office and Plaid Cymru. There were editorials in the Manchester Guardian, the News Chronicle and the Western Mail, all supportive of Gwynfor. On his 68th birthday, Gwynfor said, "I cannot see Margaret Thatcher," she was the Prime Minister then, "yielding on this. I don't see the government backing down." He told the Guardian he was ready to die, not wanting death itself, but the impact that his martyrdom would have. If I were allowed to die, there would be an upsurge in Welsh nationalism. On September the 2nd, just a month before the fast was to begin on October the 5th, a series of highly successful rallies were organised. These were packed meetings. There were packed meetings in Wales and Scotland. The most memorable gathering was in Cardiff on September the 6th, when thousands marched through the capital. The largest nationalist display since the burning of the building in Penrhyn in 1937. There were meetings in Westminster between Nicholas Edwards, the Minister for Welsh Affairs, and Cledwyn Hughes, a skilled politician and Welsh Member of Parliament. Perhaps the climate was beginning to change. The government was seriously worried. When Margaret Thatcher visited Swansea to address Conservatives, there were strong protests. The clock was ticking. Her appearance in Anglesey prompted unruly scenes, with people throwing themselves in front of her car. 2 explosive devices were left outside Nicholas Edwards' home while he was away in London. You can see that all Wales was in an uproar as it began to seem that only violence and serious social disorder would be likely to move the government. On September the 15th, Nicholas Edwards met with William Whiteley, the Home Secretary, and they decided that the only option was to concede. So after they'd had a good lunch, off they went to 10 Downing Street to get the approval of Margaret Thatcher. She heard her Home Secretary admit that he and Cledwyn Hughes, Nicholas Edwards, had been astonished by the response to Gwynfor's threat. He advised her that the wisest course was to accept the inevitable and avoid intolerable consequences. Mrs. Thatcher listened and agreed. The Iron Lady was for turning. It was this historic meeting, following a decade of imprisonment and one man's threat to starve himself to death, that Channel S4C was born. Gwynfor relinquished his presidency of Plaid Cymru in 1981, and consequently battle began among the contenders for the office. David Ellis-Thomas became president for a while, but he was a little too militant. Discontent was massive in Plaid ranks. There were issues to be addressed, one being immigration into rural Wales by non-Welsh buying holiday homes, grossly inflating the home prices so that the local Welsh couldn't afford them. During his retirement, Gwynfor published 11 books, 2 of them in 1989 and 92, Plaid Cymru and another, Fighting for Wales. They have a theme of hope that flows from the growth of Europe. To many nationalists, the evolution of Europe in the early 90s suggested a solution to the age-old theme of a free Wales. Perhaps they would now be a sanctuary for the smaller nations. David Wigley, you probably know his name because he writes regularly in Ninnau, returned to the presidency in October 1991 and was a stabilising force for Plaid. By now, Plaid Cymru had 4 members of Parliament in Westminster, its largest number ever. Gwynfor was now 80 and was ready to admit that loads were being shed from his shoulders, even though he continued to travel about 15,000 miles a year as honorary president. His activity lessened between 1992 and 1997. These years were most significant for Plaid Cymru. They witnessed the devolutionary wing of the Wales Labour Party taking the initiative under Ron Davies, the opposition spokesman on Wales. As John Major's Conservative government fell apart, it was clear that Labour would come to power and that they would introduce a Welsh Assembly. The climax of Gwynfor's career was seeing a yes vote in the second devolution referendum in September 1997. The following day, TV crews poured into Pencarrig, where Gwynfor lived, to hear the old man's views on what he considered the most important night in Welsh history. For him, the significance of the vote was clear. There would be a Welsh Assembly. The Assembly, he said, was sufficient to safeguard the life of the nation. At Plaid Cymru's annual conference, Gwynfor was hailed as the man who had contributed most to the greatest administrative revolution in the entire history of Wales. He attended the National Eisteddfod in Llanelli in 2000 to receive a Wales and the World reward. It would be his last public appearance. Despite the cheers and applause, the wheelchair that carried him that day was a clear symbol to all. Osteoporosis was destroying his bones, and leukemia was destroying his blood and bone marrow. He died in 2005 at age 92, and his beloved wife Rhiannon died 9 months later. Having lived so long on a paltry pension, he had little money to give. However, his real legacy was and is enormous. His legacy was and is modern Wales. Gwynfor Evans's funeral was the closest Wales has ever come to a state occasion since the burial of David Lloyd George. The hearse left Pencarry for a memorial service at Sion Congregational Church, Aberystwyth. People lined the streets the whole way, and thousands of people stood outside the crowded chapel, and the service was televised. His last journey was to the Celtic hill fort of Garngoch in the Carmarthenshire uplands, where he had asked for his ashes to be scattered. What could be more appropriate? The circle was complete. He was grounded in Welsh soil, where his story began. And this seems to me to be an appropriate place to end my brief account of Plaid Cymru, its influence on my life personally, and more important, its influence on the formation of what we now know as modern Wales.